And welcome back. Now, the closure of some social grant pay points is having a negative impact on many recipients. Human rights organisation Black Sash and the University of the Western Cape have done a survey on the migration of payments following the end of the contract between the South African Social Security Agency and Cash Paymaster services in 2017. Now, Black Sash says that since the South African Post Office took over, queues are longer and the dignity of the elderly is being compromised. So to tell us more about this from our Sea Point studios in Cape Town, we're joined now by Amanda Ismail, a Western Cape Regional Manager for Black Sash. And also just to indicate that we did extend an invitation to the South African Post Office to join this discussion, but they did not confirm attendance. But we'll keep following up to see if we can hear from them what their side is to this story. But for now, we are speaking to Amanda Ismail of Black Sash. Thanks so much for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation.
Amanda, firstly, following the end of that contract with CPS, recipients have had to collect their grants from post office retailers and ATMs as well. But how has this transition period been, and the migration, how has it impacted on the recipients?
Firstly, we need to be aware that SASSA has closed 80% of the pay points. Previously, there were 10,000 pay points. Currently, we are left with 1,780 pay points. And we must also understand that these pay points were in the residential area of beneficiaries, which meant they could walk there, spend some time there, and then return home. It was safe, it was secure, it was designed, it was tailored for grant beneficiaries, it was tailored to pay grants. But what we have found was that beneficiaries was not consulted during the decommissioning of pay points through the transition. We found that beneficiaries would go to the pay points expecting to have their grant paid, and then when they get there, they see the pay points has been closed down. And it caused a lot of chaos and frustration, and beneficiaries not knowing what was happening. And then they found out, like you rightly said, that they now have to access the grants at the retailers, at the ATM, or at the post office. But this comes at a cost because the nearest payment channel can be far away. Some of the beneficiaries, they now have to give out transport money to access a post office or a retailer or ATM. But some of them they can't afford. And sometimes the post office is 5 or 6 kilometers away from the residential area, and then our elderly folk, they have to walk to access their grants. Now, if you look in a rural context, the beneficiaries have to walk up hills, and it's steep terrain that they have to endure, and these are elderly people. They really have to struggle to get to the nearest payment channel just because they might not have the money to get into a taxi to the nearest payment channel. There are some areas, and an example of this in the Western Cape is the Grafwater area, where there's no post office, no alternative payment channel within the area, and then beneficiaries wanting to access their grants have to travel at least 33 kilometers to Klein Willem to access their grants. This comes at a cost of 300 Rand to make the trip. This is a lot of money for grant beneficiaries. So the first negative impact we see, it's very inaccessible, and it takes out of grant beneficiaries' pockets because now they have to give out money in the first place, which they don't have. The other channel that they can access is the commercial bank ATM. And we know that for them to have this bank account, it comes with transaction costs, it comes with bank fees. So we are moving further away from the Constitution, who say that it is the right of the beneficiaries to access the full cash value of their grants. So they firstly have to give out transport money to get to the ATM, and then they still have to pay the transaction cost. We also see some of our beneficiaries who struggle to remember their PIN numbers for the bank accounts. We had a case where a beneficiary kept his bank card with his ID and his PIN number in the ID. When you went back to go and access his grant, it was gone. somebody stole his grant because they had access to his PIN, because he was too afraid he's going to forget his PIN. So we can see how the beneficiaries are really in a very vulnerable position because of the decommissioning of pay points. What we also observed is the conditions at the payment channels. Like I said before, previously the pay points was tailored for the needs of the beneficiaries. Now beneficiaries has to join the existing line on the existing queue at the ATM. We see on grant pay days at the retailers these long queues, and sometimes the queues goes outside of the shops. And the beneficiaries has to withstand all weather conditions. In the summer, they have to endure the hot sun. In winter, they have to stand in the rain. And they stand there because they need the money. We also see that sometimes there's no chairs, and our beneficiaries don't have access to ablution facilities. When they want to use the bathroom inside of the malls, they have to actually pay because the bathrooms are not free. So we can see how we're moving away from the beneficiaries accessing the full cash value of the grant. And these are bread and butter issues for our beneficiaries. Another negative impact that they had before, previously at the pay points, we had a SASSA official, a SASSA help desk, where the beneficiary, if there was a problem with the card or with a grant, maybe there was a short payment, they could go to the SASSA official and they could sort out their concern immediately. But now we see at the ATMs, at the retailers, or at the post office, there's no help desk, there's no SASSA official that can help them. So what they have to do now, say they went to the ATM, they withdrew the money, they see there's a problem. Now for them to go to the nearest local SASSA office, it's another transport money they don't have. And when they get to SASSA, eventually SASSA tell them, no, but you have to go to the police station to get the affidavit. And these are institutions that are quite far from each other. Every time they have to travel, it's transport money that they have to pay. So we found that beneficiaries, if they have a problem, they don't have the means to access recourse. So they are left to struggle on their own.
Amanda, it's a very, very sad picture that you are sketching here for us. And I have to ask, at the time when this transition was actually effected, were these sort of problems not anticipated, or, did this come as a surprise, as an unintended consequence of the migration process?
I like the word that you use. It's unintended consequences. And we see that our elderly and our disabled are bearing the cost of the transition. So it is an unintended consequence that was not foreseen as part of the transition process.
But then something needs to be done, talking about the decommissioning of the pay points. So if you have someone who is accessing a grant that is perhaps 1,200 Rand in total value, and they have to pay 300 Rand of that, for transport purposes, then, as you say, we are constitutionally now trampling on the rights of the grant recipient. So what is being done? Has this been highlighted with SASSA, and what is currently being done about the situation?
As Black Sash, we have commissioned a national study because we could see that beneficiaries were not consulted. So we went across KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, Eastern Cape and Western Cape, and we did the study. And in areas which were severely affected by the decommissioning, we are compiling a national report which we will make public and which we will share with the CEO of SASSA and also the minister, as well as other beneficial stakeholders. We are doing local advocacy campaigns where we have dialogues and speak outs within the community, where we minute the meetings and we have attendance registers, and we have petitions where we send to the local area managers of SASSA to ask them please to reconsider opening the pay points. We're also busy with a documentary in which we follow the beneficiaries and record their challenges on grant payment days. We see, for example, in some of the rural areas where grant beneficiaries has to go the night before to wait for their grant to be paid out the next day because they're so afraid that the payment channel will run out of cash. And it has happened where they go and access the payment channel and then they run out of money and they can just pay a limited amount for the day. So our beneficiaries spend the night in some cases to wait for their grants. And so we have recorded with our documentary team the lived realities of our grant beneficiaries in the new system.
Now, Amanda, we know that the whole saga between SASSA and Cash Paymaster services, that played out very publicly. And listening to what you are telling us now, I'm quite curious to know how you would compare and juxtapose this system over the past few years when CPS was in charge and to where we find ourselves right now. How would you describe it?
Previously, we had concerns with CPS and that ended up in the Constitutional Court. What we like about this new account is that it's ring-fenced. The account with the post office is ring-fenced, which means beneficiaries are protected somewhat against illegal deductions. We like the product that is available there, but we would just want the infrastructure of the post office to be strengthened and for them to work on the connectivity issues so that it's easier and the grant payment can be more accessible to the grant beneficiaries. So comparing the two, the CPS and the SAPO, on the SASSA SAPO account, beneficiaries are more protected than before.
But having said that, and looking at the state of the South African Post Office, from what you have described to us, what grant recipients have to go through every month just to access their money, it really becomes a problem. I'm actually lost for words at this point, because if the situation continues, what then? Where does it leave these grant recipients?
What Black Sash is advocating for three things at the moment. The first thing is for SASSA to reconsider reopening some of the pay points, especially in the rural areas and the peri-urban areas where grant beneficiaries are hardest hit. So we really want to ask them to consider reopening the pay points. Secondly, we're also advocating for the post office infrastructure and capacity to be strengthened so that they can assist grant beneficiaries in a more accessible way. And then the third thing that we're also advocating for, because we see there's about 60% of grant beneficiaries who access their grant at the commercial bank and the ATMs, we are asking for the bank fees and the transaction charges to be subsidized or to be eliminated so that the beneficiaries don't have that added cost that they have to pay. But for us, the number one thing is for SASSA to reconsider reopening some of these pay points, especially in the rural or peri-urban areas. And when we say that, we are not asking for CPS to come back into the system. No. We are asking for SASSA to open the pay points.
And just with regard to those transaction costs, because part of the issue with CPS was, of course, the 10 Rand deductions that were made on transactions. So how much? Did you take the time to actually survey how much the commercial banks are charging in this regard?
Yes, we did. And our researchers included that in our national report. We found that it can vary between 21 Rand and 60 Rand, but different banks charges a different rate. So it's quite a lot that our beneficiaries have to bear in terms of the transaction. And it depends also how many times the beneficiaries go to withdraw their money.
But hold on, Amanda, 21 Rand compared to the 10 Rand outcry, that was very loud and, far heard about what CPS was charging. Why hasn't anybody raised the alarm about this 21 Rand? We have raised alarm multiple occasions.
and this is one of the reasons that is underscoring our advocacy actions in this regard. It appears that our cries are falling on deaf ears, and that is why we are advocating now on a stronger level, because we found that for our beneficiaries it is becoming a bread and butter issue.
Well, Amanda, we're going to have to leave it there. Amanda Ismail, Western Cape Regional Manager for Black Sash, talking to us about their findings into the research that looks into the impact of decommissioning of social grant pay points. And it's not painting a pretty picture. And I'm just flabbergasted. We were so offended by the 10 Rand that CPS was taking off these grants when people went to withdraw their payments. And now we hear that the commercial banks are charging 21 Rand and maybe more in certain instances. What have we done? Have we regressed? Quite a few questions to be asked here, and I suspect we'll have further discussions on this matter. But let's take a quick break.